Today we're actually going to go over a game from the Floripa Open. For those that don't know where that is, that's sunny Brazil, of course.
Ooh.
But I tell you, it's kind of gently easing us back into the dragon after that little episode we have with the Anti-Sicilians, and to show you that the Sicilian dragon isn't only about attacking, hacking, and all the rest of it, because it's a nice little positional game we've got here. But also, I wanted to bridge the gap, and you're going to see exactly why. So I'm going to kick off the game. We had e4, c5, Sicilian defense, knight f3, and black here played knight c6. Now, the truth of the matter is you cannot force the Sicilian dragon if you play the move knight c6. But last month, no doubt you've picked up on that after knight c3, I highly recommend the move knight c6. And one of the reasons for that is keeping the knight flexible to be able to come to e7, for example, in those, Grand Prix attack variations. Where, as we've mentioned before, you might want to actually blunt this bishop on the c4 and bring the knight to e7. Likewise, in the closed Sicilian, the knight looks very nice on e7, provided white doesn't successfully make a pawn break and leave you with a massive hole here on d6, which they can invade, i.e. don't allow them to get that little hole. So
don't do that.
In this, after knight c3, I would personally recommend knight c6. d6, of course, is maybe compulsory for Najdorf players who, of course, can't put their knight on c6. Serves them right for picking that one after all. However, after the move knight c6, the problem here, d4, we have the pawn break, knight takes. How can black get the real, genuine 100% Sicilian dragon? Well, it's not so easy. I tell you why, because after g6, white has the choice, if they so desire, to set up a Maroczy bind via the move pawn to c4.
Such a weird looking move, but so popular after all, right?
It is popular, and it is kind of, you can't deny white gets a little bit of a space advantage, and it's kind of frustrating to play against. However, white can't realistically play c4 and now go for an attack. Castling queenside is generally not going to be advised when they've got a targeted pawn here on c4 and a half open file. So it's more going to be about castling on the king side of the board and doing all positional stuff, maybe edging forward on the king side, but pretty much controlling that d5 square. Is there any way that black can actually prevent that pawn from going to c4? Well, if black played knight f6 first, as you do in the dragon, but with the pawn on d6 rather than knight c6, of course, there's plenty of other Sicilian variations available here, the Pelican, the classical. But if you go g6, this is actually called the semi-accelerated dragon. And the reason why I don't really like this particular line here is because there's one little sequence white can do, taking on c6, followed by playing the move e5.
Yucky.
It's a little bit awkward for that knight, which probably has to drop back to g8 with his tail between his legs, which is not really ideal, not ideal. Now, there is an analogous variation with the white bishop on e3 and the bishop on g7, where black can consider going knight d5 to sacrifice a pawn and get quite a lot of counterplay. But certainly in this position, no, I don't like that too much here. So black has to play knight g8. Okay, maybe we can attack that pawn, but of course the idea of developing your pieces isn't to like undevelop them like the next move back. So so this is the reason why knight f6 followed by knight g6 isn't so popular, but that's still popular enough to have a name, of course. The semi-accelerated dragon.
Yeah, that name is like almost like every other German word. That's how long it seems.
Yeah, good. Now, so what happens is after knight c6, white played d4 takes, and we go g6. But the point is, white chose not to play c4, so white didn't go for a Maroczy bind. So what you could say, well, black's got way cheap, but why does he really do this move order? Because actually, as you're going to see, the whole point is after bishop to g7, bishop e3 protecting, and now knight to f6. So this is one variation, for example, where after knight takes pawn takes e5, black could go knight d5 and genuinely sacrifice a pawn if they wanted to. Now, the other, and knight g8 is better as well then, because you're attacking this pawn, and white might not have wanted to commit their bishop to e3. They might have wanted to go a little bit further. But the point is, it's very difficult for now to white to set up a Yugoslav attack formation, because this pawn is going to be able to go to d5 in one turn.
Uh-huh.
Remember our main line. I'm not even going to put it on the board. Our main line of 9 castles in the Yugoslav attack sees black go from d6 to d5. Well, if you
Yes.
can do that one move earlier with the king on e1, black is absolutely going to be laughing. And actually, I tell you what, if
Oh,
you look
okay.
on the chess base, well, let's just quickly put on. So supposing we had this, queen d2, black could go d5. So essentially, we have the same position we would normally have,
Just
but with
quicker.
white castled king side, queen side, which makes quite a big difference because for starters, it's not even a pawn sacrifice because there's no rook on the d file, and it's just very good, basically. Yeah, you will see quite a few games like that on the databases where white just tried to set up a Yugoslav attack, but because black hadn't played d6 yet, was unable to achieve it. So therefore, it's still very playable for white to play like this, but he can't now just play like a Yugoslav attack. He could go bishop c4 and then hang around going bishop b3 to try and wait for black to play d6. But then, of course, he can't play his 9 castles variation, for example. So now it looks for most of us as though we're going to head for a classical variation, which is most commonly reached. After castles, here, for example, black could go d6 and we're directly into the classical variation of the Sicilian dragon. But sensible, again, would be for black to strike out with d5. Very kind of nice equalizing or more than equalizing move, which looks to pick on these centrally posted white pieces. So how's white going to stop that? Well, white played the move knight b3. Which means, of course, that the queen has now more coverage over the d5 square. So black can't really go d5 at the moment. And black commits himself to d6. So if we had, for example, well, d6 now, that if we have now bishop e2, which we do, and black castles, if white just castled kingside now, we would be directly transposed back into the classical variation, the mainline variation of the classical Sicilian dragon, where what tends to happen is black will put their bishop on e6 because it's a little bit more exciting than d7. You could equally actually fianchetto on the queen side, and white might play f4. And of course, one of the most positional themes that you need to learn about is the concept of, and it's brewing already, the exchange sacrifice rook takes here. So for example, if white said, I'm going to crush you like a bug, you thought just because I didn't play the Yugoslav attack, I wasn't going to checkmate you, but look, I am squashing you back, it's going to be horrible. And you say, no, I don't think so. Rook takes c3, which, by the way, attacks this bishop on e3 in the event of pawn takes. And after pawn takes, knight takes pawn for an absolutely juicy, delightful position for black.
Lovely
With
indeed.
the exchange, has got not only those wrecked, shattered pawns on the queen side, but a pawn in the bag and some amazingly well centralized white pieces. So let's turn that off. And so that's very unprofessional. Otherwise, I'd turn my phone on silent, but it wouldn't. Now, knight takes e4. And of course, you would recognize this is an amazing position for black here. So that's what would happen if castles. This would be a classical dragon. Of course, white isn't compelled to go f4, f5. Of course, certainly not. f4 normal. Now, instead, though, white did something a little bit different. So I thought this covered so many different bases in this game here. White played queen d2.
Yeah, I've seen that.
So you're thinking, okay, what's going down here? What's going down? And well, the whole point is now what's very interesting here is that we're kind of, well, let's have a little look. Black played a bishop to e6. So the system is I have actually covered before this exact system, but with the white pawn on f3
Yes.
and the bishop back on f1, which is basically even a few top players have played this. I think we saw a game with Magnus either playing white or black side of it. I can't remember. I guess I should really know the answer to that question. I think he's played white. I wouldn't say it's a brilliant system, but the whole idea is whereas we get that main 9 card, that main position where black-white wants to dissuade d5 by either castling or going bishop c4 or going g4, they have this option of knight b3. So this would be exactly the transposition. So the question is, which is a more useful move, pawn to f3 or bishop to e2? Well, the bishop on e2 controls h5, which you said could be quite useful. And it kind of controls the g4 square, but it doesn't actually stop a black piece from going there. But I think more all in all, it's much more useful to have f3 because it supports e4 and it supports a launch of the pawns down here. So I'm not that keen on this move, queen d2. And the whole point is if white does decide to castle kingside, actually queen d2 doesn't necessarily fit in with this system. The whole idea of going bishop h6 normally would fit in with an h4, h5 type plan.
True.
So queen d2 happened and black played bishop e6. Yeah, I mean, is it possible to do an alternative move? Well, given the white has now not quite the full control over g4, you could certainly consider a move like knight g4 anyhow. This sort of thing is always double-edged because it means after taking, black's got the bishop pair and black has very nice control over this c4 square, or rather white has a lack of control over that square. But if white should get a kingside attack going, of course, you no longer have a defensive knight there on f6. Still bishop e6 was played, which I think is absolutely fine. And white now continued this plan of going bishop h6. So I don't think this is a great system, and this game's going to show just why. So I think it's quite a nice, instructive encounter. From the Floripa Open, Brazil. Now, here we go. So we've got bishop h6. And black, what are they going to do? Well, they played a very sensible move here and simply developed the rook, brought the rook to a half open file by playing rook to c8. However, other moves are available. So, for example, I also in this position quite like the idea of saying, come on then, checkmate me if you think you're going to. And then I think certainly with the white knight on b3, a very logical plan would be to razz that pawn down here to try and embarrass that knight on b3. And of course, that might give black control of the d4 square as well to hop their knight into at some stage. But also I quite like this move queen b6 in this position because the queen can't be harassed here. And actually, I noticed the one amusing thing, which I don't know why I think of these things, but you, of course, are pretty big on your tactics, Honor. I know that. You love doing your tactics.
I love
trainer things. After knight h4, for example, again, I really like the idea of going a5, a4. But after knight e5, I guess we're sort of fronting a cheeky little queen takes f2.
Oh, nice.
Followed by a knight to g4 sort of tactic. Don't forget, we've got two knights covering that. And picking up that queen on h6. So that could win a useful pawn. But queen b6, just in general, I think that would be quite good. So I think actually yeah.
Sorry.
Go for it.
Since you really challenged me about my tactics.
Are
we really winning a pawn?
Wow.
Because, I'm sorry, I just calculated it in my head. Maybe I'm wrong. And probably will show me.
Okay, I tell you what we'll do. We're going to give white a totally... Oh, man. I'm going to give white a totally useless move. Just for the sake of... I mean, it would have pulled it the other way. I'm trying to...
It has to be h5. Now, it has to be h5,
yeah, okay.
Right?
Now, the point is... No, the point is... Yeah, but that's not the point, is it? That I actually made I did make the point of h. The thing about h5 is that when the black knight ends up on h6,
now I understand. Yeah, exactly.
You're going to go hg, and you're going to be attacking that.
Exactly.
So you've cheated. When you said you were threatening it, I am threatening it, but that threat might be diminished or even.
Thank you.
I think we're on the same page.
We are 100% on the same page. I just wanted to. I just sharpened my tactical skills, and you just really showed exactly what we were talking about. So thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Truth be told, though, although that is a tactic, and you think, oh, it would be so nice to do that. You know what? You've actually pointed the whole thing. If white goes h4 and then h5, then it's probably not going to be available. And I quite like again the simple chess which black deployed in this game here of just bringing the rook nicely to c8. again, now this time round, if white was to play the move h4 before swapping, then I quite like the idea of luring the queen away. And now even the move knight b4 could be incredibly awkward for white, who of course needs to defend this pawn here on c2.
And the c3 knight is always a little nice option, maybe.
Do you know what? Funnily enough, if white was to play rook c1, I think we could do it anyway now. Because even though our knight is attacked, we could take that pawn and then that pawn, actually. I think that would be quite good for black as well, because albeit this pawn's on pre, we've got this pawn on pre, and white's position's a little bit of a mess over there. So absolutely right. So the only thing about knight b4 with regards to an exchange sacrifice on c3 is that the knight will be attacked, whereas it wouldn't be attacked on a5 or e5.
Yep.
But of course, it brings the extra threat of that little fork on c2. So white actually chose to take on g7. Bishop takes g7. King takes g7. Now also as well, black actually, we mustn't forget, still has the idea of going d5 should they want to, if the white king remains in the center. So for example, if white played h4, thematic is to react to wing play with action in the center of the board if you wanted, if you don't think you've got anything better. But of course, if everything gets traded off, let's suppose we have a situation where things get traded off, of course, even with the queen, I guess, then that's going to look kind of fairly irrelevant over there in the general scheme of things.
I like that, yeah.
So white actually chose here just to castle kingside. So we are more back into a kind of classical variation where white basically has traded off those dark squared bishops. And it's over to black. What move are we going to do? Well, I still think actually the move queen b6 will be a very reasonable move. Yep. I just like it now in the absence of a white dark square bishop. It pins that pawn. It eyes up this square here so that black could do an a5, a4 plan. And if white tries to move that pawn to a4, then there's going to be a pawn hanging because the bishop takes b3. But instead...
Quick question. After knight a4, we just pull back, or we go to c7. I mean,
well, okay. You know what? Let's just go for this here. So if knight a4, so the first thought is going to be this pawn, of course, is going to be hanging here. Now, oh my word, that must be some brilliant tactics for you to count up the pieces. Wow. But I don't mean with a view to black just going knight takes e4, knight takes queen, knight takes queen, knight takes rook, knight takes rook. I didn't mean that sort of thing. I mean, if we just drop the queen back, like you just pointed out,
I see.
We leave the white knight looking silly on a4 and the pawn still hanging on c3.
Gotcha. So if the knight would move back to c3, we can.
Then you're going to. But then your question is it worth having the queen? Is the queen better placed on c7 than d8?
Gotcha.
And I think it is, because in any instance, black didn't go. He played the move a6 for a little bit of queenside play over here.
But that's very good to know. Yeah.
Simple expansion. But I think, yeah, all in all, the queen would be slightly more useful. What, of course, would be more useful if you got the queen on c7 and the f8 rook somewhere along the c file for a kind of
excellent
three down that c file of trebled major pieces. Spoiler alert. Now, so we have a6 anyway, and now it's over to white to play, and white did play the move here, pawn to f4. So if white was incredibly lucky and had all the time in the world, you'd think maybe they could achieve some sort of here queen h6. But even then, actually, they need to get rid of the knight from f6 to deliver checkmate. True. So I'm not in general a big fan of the way that white is playing this opening. Just in general, don't like it too much. As for black, love the way black plays this game. Actually, such simple chess. Just a little bit of queenside expansion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. b5. Now, what does this expansion bring with us? Well, two things. First of all, it casts a little bind down on this square, which facilitates access there to a bishop or knight. And simply, of course, we're threatening b4, attacking that knight to win the e4 pawn at the moment. So a very simple threat. In fact, even if white ploughed on with f5 now, I would imagine we could just go b4. For example, pawn takes here. And actually, an important idea, queen b6 check. Look at this. The king has to move out of the way, then take the knight. The queen has to take it back, really. Now, of course, at the moment, the queen is pinning the knight to the king, but we have to move knight b4 now, unleashing a discovered attack from that c8 rook. This is going to be hanging. We'll be able to get that. This is kind of hanging. We'll probably be able to get that at some stage. So that looks very nice for black as well. So after b5, so look, let's just stop here for the moment. This is the sort of thing I want to talk about. There's no tactics, black checkmating the white on king b1, but what black is doing is just advancing with that little kind of queenside expansion plan, ultimately to make use of the c file, the half open c file. White played bishop f3 here. And why do they do that? Presumably to bolster that e4 pawn. And another world, another life, perhaps e5 might be some sort of threat. It's not really a threat in this particular position. But that move is just basically bolstering the e4 square. Now, a couple of different plans. I mean, black's move was very, very sensible here as well. But in this type of position, it's worth noting there's also the option to do this. I quite like this idea. Bishop to c4. And when the rook moves, play e5. Now, e5, wow. In fact, I do believe once upon a time, I made some DVDs for the real deal. Something like that is coming back to me now. Was it Stay Alive with e5? Or maybe I had something else.
I quickly have to, everybody who's here the very first time ever, like by accident, you're like here and you're into this for such a long time, you're enjoying the show, thank you. What Chris is talking about is his Fritz trainers, which you can see in the link below the YouTube video in the article. Check them out. It is an absolute must for every Sicilian dragon friend. Okay.
Thank you. Now, my point is, other than for that, shameless plug there. Well, what I was going to say is the move e5 normally in the dragon isn't considered so early because, of course, it has three terrible things about it normally. A, blocking the bishop on g7. B, leaving yourself a backward d pawn. And C, conceding an outpost here on d4. But in this position here, the ultimate aim is to actually secure that square for a black knight, and it's going to be a wonderful, wonderful square. The other point is, there's no dragon bishop here that you're even blocking in. There is an outpost on d5, but it can be taken by a white bishop or knight. And this bishop is a bad piece, and also, the d6, the backward d6 pawns, there's other things going on with b4 and ef and all that. In fact, funny enough, if white played f5, which would to most be the most worrying thing about the whole g4, g5 kind of expansion, actually, I figure here, even if we now went to a5 to go a4, which would then allow our knight to hop into d4 and g4, we can actually use that g file for our own devices.
Nice.
For example, g5, even b4 now, and then look at this take, and d5, and we might. So I think this sort of thing will be absolutely nice as well. So bishop c4 and e5 is a known theme, particularly in the classical variation. And here, though, black plays another very simple move, knight a5, simply looking to invade that c4 square. Another topic, I believe, on the Real Deal with DVDs about how good this c4 square is, particularly for black knight. Now, however, temporarily, we have to admit that is only protected by the queen. So if white was to play e5 here, we couldn't now take that pawn because a little queen trade would mean that guy's hanging on a5. But very comfortable is just to drop it back here. Because once we do what we're going to do with our knight, we've got the pressure going on here. And of course, should black go ef, we can always take it back with the knight. And then our knight is even better here, where it can go to some nice handy squares. So e5 is no good after knight a5, and white instead just plays the move knight takes knight, and we have queen takes. So, for example, if this bishop wasn't on this square, let's supposing we weren't threatening b4. For example, there was a white pawn on a3 and this bishop was back on e2. That would be a perfect example to sacrifice the exchange on c3. If you can wreck that pawn structure and win the pawn on e4, it's just the thing to do. Now, for those that are worrying about, oh no, I don't like to give up my rook for a knight. I mean, the rook going straight lines, up, down, left, right, backwards.
So thanks for watching for those. No. We have an alternative, probably.
No, what I was actually going to point is you are correct to think if it just got down to a flat rook against a knight, you want to be very careful about doing that. But when there's other pieces on the board, boy, it just works wonders. So just bear that in mind. You don't want to just do rook and knight, they win your a pawn and queen their a pawn, and you go, that's not the way it's supposed to work. So good. Anyway, moving on swiftly. Queen takes e5, and white played the move a3 now, preventing that b4 move. They will attack the knight and bring pressure down the c file. So what do we do here? And this is what I love about this game. Super duper simple chess. Pause your video here, everybody. This is not like an amazing, brilliant tactic. It's just a simple improving of the position here.
Find the best move, take your time. Imagine it's a real game. And also keep in mind that all what we're talking about today is also in the Chess Base News article. I hope you save it as every month in your dragon folder. And you put a little dragon icon on top of it so you always recognize it.
Great.
That would be great.
Anyway, yeah. Okay. Well, you had enough time, everybody. Study. No, there's nothing special. I just love this sort of move in general. Like just play rook to c4.
Oh, well, I wouldn't have found that.
Right, but this is it, because the c file is absolutely vital. Is simply looking to double or treble on the c file. White played queen e3.
Double up, right.
And remember, so that maybe frees up the knight to move away. And now we have queen to c7.
Okay.
So look at that c file pressure that we're really building up. Also, with black having the option, should they want to go queen c5 at some stage and swap off queens to make things. And then we just have a simple plan of a5 and b4 to break through on the c file. So let's see how this all works. So queen c7. White played bishop e2, looking to budge that rook. And this is exactly what we happened. Queen c5, forcing the trade of queens. Now, normally, so like I say, people are used to these life and death checkmate situations going on here. But I just wanted to show you there's a different side, a gentler side to the dragon where you just win with no trickery or complications, just straightforward chess. Right. So now question. Do we think we're threatening rook takes c3 now? I do believe yes is a definite possibility.
What? I was thinking interesting. This is really interesting because I thought like now that the queens are off the board and there's less and less pieces, this
I know, but I still say it's true because we're almost certainly going to win that other one as well. So an endgame is fine, but just not the flat knight against the rook or even the knight and bishop against rook. Really, it's good to have another rook on the board. That's the key to things. So definitely rook takes c3, I would say, is a threat here. And evidently white agreed because they played bishop d3 here to put a stop to that little idea. So black, what are they? So in contrast, I wouldn't be so happy to go rook c8 and rook takes c3 now without winning that e pawn. I wouldn't be as thrilled about that. But part of the reason for that as well is that maybe white would have the chance to go a4 and get action for their rook along the a file. So don't want action for those white rooks. So what happened was a simple plan B, rook b8. So very simple idea.
That's nice.
A5 and b4. And that pretty much is what comes to fruition here. So again, actually, if white played f5, wouldn't really be that much of an achievement regards the possibility for a kingside attack. But I think we can just now put our bishop to this square here, c4. And we still have the a5 and the b4 plan. And this guy's a little bit weaker as well. Let's see what actually happened here. Well, the white knight moved away to e2. So now pretty much this bishop is holding the fort, holding white's position together because it's guarding the c2 pawn and it's guarding the e4 pawn, of course. So what should we do about that? Well, I love this move here. Bishop c4. Let's eliminate that key defender with a very simple threat now of trading the bishops on d3 and just invading the seventh rank for a little fort that will win a pawn. So what's white going to do about this? It's just a very uncomfortable position, to be honest. And that's just with one rook. We've got the doubling of the rooks available as well. So it's very difficult for white to contest that at the moment. Also, for those tactically aware, we're doing more than threatening bishop takes bishop. We're simply threatening knight takes pawn here. Cheeky little move.
True.
Because our bishop, of course, will be threatening that, which is a real problem for white. What can he do about that? Well, all he could really do was move his knight back to c3. Bit grovelly for white, to say the least. And what are we going to do with black? Well, it's black is back with the main plan. a5, simply to go a4. Now, what are we going to do about that? Again, this is a very tricky situation here. White played rook f c1, recognizing at least that all the action is going to happen along the c file. And again, I can only highlight a very simple threat is to take the bishop and go b4 and then rook c2 and invade on the 7th rank. Rook f c1 and b4 happens. A takes b4, A takes b4. Again, where can this knight go to? Well, it can't revisit its old haunting ground on e2 because of knight takes e4. So it's pretty much knight a4 is where it goes to. Attacking that black rook on c5. What are we going to do with that? Well, cool as a cucumber. Let's just drop it back. Not everybody knows knights on the rim are, of course, dim. That knight's not going anywhere from over there, and we are just regrouping. We are getting ready to double our rooks on the c-file. Simple, dimple chess. What can white do about this? Well, white played the move b3. Now,
I thought so,
can white try anything? Well, if they went e5, for example, we'll just take that and go here. And this is probably just going to drop off anyway, so that's not really much use. So they played b3 to attack the bishop, force it to go away. Now, I actually think pretty simple here would be just to take off on d3 and go rook b c8, taking control of the c file. That looks pretty good to me. But white's next move was also a good move. Drop the bishop back, keeping the options open for the time being and keeping that as a weakness. And only when white played knight b2, dreaming of getting some sort of blocker and offering up some sort of protection. Only now did black swap off on d3. Can't take back with the knight because of the e-pawn, but look at this. This is the lovely move. Takes here, and this is just such simple chess. Just park that rook on c3.
Yeah, that has to happen.
This sort of theme where you have a little entry point, a little hook, a little an outpost here. Knights love outposts, but of course this rook here parks itself like that, like a thorn, and says, what are you going to do about me? Because I am going to take that pawn and attack your knight. And if you take me, you're going to leave me with a pretty annoying passed pawn on c3.
Absolutely,
yeah. So basically, well, white doesn't really have a lot of choice, actually. He did decide that he was going to take off on c3 and then drop the knight back to d1 in the hope that he's going to win this pawn. But, of course, the problem is we get to take this pawn on b3, and already we're one pawn up. Rook c1. But white was hoping, no, surely I'm going to get that pawn to rebalance the material situation. But black said, well, hang on a minute. No, that's not going to happen. You can have that pawn, but I want some more pawns, thank you, over here. c2. Now, if white attempted to play something like knight f2 to hope to win that back again, no. You can't be doing that sort of thing, not with rook b1 coming. So I'm afraid not much, well, wherever the knight moves to, rook b1 could happen. So there's no real choice. You've got to take that pawn on c2. And now I go a pawn up, but it's not just a pawn up. Sometimes you can be a pawn down and grovel in these endgames when pawns are on the both sides, same side. But no, it looks like it's going to be not one, not three, but two pawns that we're going to be up.
Yeah.
But is it? You're saying, I'm not so
Yeah.
sure about that, you're saying, because the knight can surely move to somewhere that defends it. Well, let's see what would happen if it went to knight to f2. We'd say, yep, we'll attack it. White will say, I can defend it. And
Oh
you can say, that's checkmate.
no.
Tough luck. That's the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. So unfortunately, you can't do that. So he could say, I'm going to go knight c3. And that's exactly what he did say. Well, he probably didn't say it out loud, but he made the move in the game, knight c3.
What a
But
weird opponent I have, just marking those words while he's playing. Oh, well.
It's just like in that original Master game that I used to watch when I was young. They're busy chatting away during the game. Rook E is very off-putting, I would have imagined, to the opponents. Now, rook e3. Oh my word. Let's not forget. Oh my word. This is the beauty of this game. There's no absolute checkmates. It's not like our brilliant sacrifices normally. But we can see we're just simply threatening knight takes e4. But guess what? What if white said, no, you're not doing knight takes e4 on my watch because I am going to take your rook?
Well, in this case, you just say, well, then I take my knight to g4, I guess, right?
Better than that.
No. Better than that? Ladies and gentlemen, stop the video. What is the best? Oh, God, it's
there's
so
hardly any
clear.
pieces on the board,
It's
are there?
so clear. What is wrong with me? Good morning, Arnie. We'll take the knight.
Actually, I quite like your knight g4 move. Actually, it's quite like your knight g4 move. But okay, rook takes c3, I think would be, yeah, that's quite handy.
I was focusing on knight g4 because, of course, earlier there was a little mate threat.
Yeah,
and I
there was
always
a little
like mate
mate
threats. So, yeah.
What would be nice if we could go knight g4, king f1, knight h2,
Exactly.
king f2, knight king g1, and we go back, we get exactly the same position, but with the h pawn gone. But anyway, but that's definitely worth it. So back here, and I'm afraid then after rook e3, it looks like it's going to be another pawn. And I'm afraid that's exactly what happened. E5, and really that's two pawns up. And then before you know it, it's just two wonderful pawns razzing down the board. They did a little bit of toing and froing over here, whilst black was no doubt enjoying himself. And then eventually, I don't know what was going on there. And then at e4, okay. And now white decided, oh, I've had enough of this sort of thing. That's too many pawns, and actually chose to resign in this position. White did. So I thought that was a nice little game to look at, basically.
Indeed, especially because black just had was dictating the moves. Black felt like it was white and just had so many plans, ideas because of the position, how they built it up. Very nicely, very nice example. Yeah, and something different.
I don't usually highlight this enough, actually, but actually compared to all the other Sicilian variations, right? We all know the dragon. You do a kingside fianchetto, white can go h4, h5, go for an attack, absolutely fine. But other than that, compared to all other Sicilian variations, just in general terms, there aren't any weaknesses in the dragon setup.
I think so too.
If you move your e pawn, then d pawn is a little bit weak. If you move it one square, if you move it two squares, like in the Pelican, you're given an outpost and a backward d. So compared to the other variations, you don't actually have any weaknesses in your pawn structure, but you still have the bonus of the half open c file, like all the other variations as well. It's just the getting checkmated bit that people don't really need to get used to, or don't need to get used to, would be really more the case. So that's it. But no, love that game. Great, nice little bridge, I thought, between the Anti-Sicilians and getting back on the main trail next time around.
Yes, if you want to check out the Anti-Sicilians, this was our last video. It was, of course, one of the most viewed videos, as I predicted, because people just also want to know, because people hate it when people don't play the dragon. But if finally the dragon comes on the board, check out everything else. It is so much fun to play the dragon. And yeah, there's no better person to present that than Chris, in my opinion. So that's it for today. This was our monthly dragon. Yeah, we see each other next month again, hopefully. Bye.